Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leader Generation. I'm your host, Tessa Burg, and today I am joined by Paul Kelly. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of A Million Ads, also known as AMA. We're very excited to have him. We'll be talking about personalized audio advertising in 2025. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Tessa, and delighted to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's interesting to think about what audio is going to be in 2025 after so much has happened in 2024 as it relates to AI and audio. And before we jump into this very big subject and give marketers just a preview of the opportunities they'll have to really change their media mix and how they reach customers, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and role at AMA.
Sure. So I started in the music business, actually pre-Spotify, which I suppose dates myself somewhat. But it was a very exciting time because it was right at that moment when peer-to-peer services were burgeoning and the new model wasn't quite in place. But there was a real kind of fear as to whether a commercially viable model would exist for music. iTunes for a moment, with the 99 cents download, pointed one way, but of course that quickly became usurped by the all-you-can-eat subscription model, which of course dominates and defines not just media but so much of commerce today as well, even in the retail sector, with of course Walmart Plus and the predecessor Amazon Prime. So from the music industry, I then went into television effectively. So Warner Media, Discovery, and then Viacom, all in kind of media sales and marketing roles, before ultimately making the jump to audio and to ad tech specifically, which has been, I think now three years here at AMA, and it's been a fantastic journey.
That is an incredible background. I remember when they were first trying to monetize music and everyone was trying to get as much as they could for free until luckily artists took a stand and were like, hey, listen, like we made this original content. So it's funny because my career has always been in protecting now the artist, and these monetization models make it possible for them to do what they do, but also for us to all get our content in a responsible way. And there have been some incredible changes and updates at AMA. In 2023, you launched Studio.AI, and just 12 months later surpassed 15 billion impressions. And for a point of comparison, that is 5 times more than your fellow countryman Ed Sheeran's global hit, Shape of You. So tell us a little bit about Studio.AI, and the impact that it had at AMA.
Sure. So the launch of Studio.AI was born from an insight, which really, I think, kind of changed how we think about the company and our platform. We used to go to clients and sell them on the benefit of lots of different messages, right? So changing the creative based on the listener's context or preference, which of course from a theoretical level holds true, right? If a message is more relevant, it will be more salient. It will embed memory structures better, or it will prompt a behavioral response, which of course is the goal of a lot of advertising, not all. But what we didn't fully appreciate, perhaps because audio was and maybe today still is kind of a separate silo to other digital channels, like digital audio is comparatively speaking quite young as a channel, as it's kind of still migrating from terrestrial radio broadcast to digital. Spotify, of course, is relatively new, and podcasting as a medium, which we are broadcasting on right here, is also new. So the infrastructure that had been built around display web advertising, and then more recently social and social video, already was built to handle, to traffic, to deliver a very, very high volume of messages. So once a big advertiser had, let's just call it a Twitter, an X account back in the day, there was then a demand to feed this algorithm, to feed the channel with content. So our kind of realization was that, you know, many of our large clients are already producing, managing, distributing assets for other channels, predominantly visual assets. And there was systems, machinery built to make that work fluid, easier, right? To handle all of this kind of volume. Audio didn't have that. And clients were not aware that it could be executed in audio, i.e., rather than just, you know, limit this type of advertising to display and social channels, could we also use audio, which has typically been considered a branding channel or medium, in a more kind of performance-oriented capacity? And if yes, it became very clear to us that it would have to be just as simple, just as easy, just as turnkey as what clients are used to, you know, with the very advanced platforms that Google, Meta, and others have provided and continue to provide. And so that's where Studio.AI was born, which was really a productized kind of version of what we already have as a dynamic ad server and dynamic creative studio, but more purpose built to easily populate and as I said, distribute slight variations of a core message based on, you know, the location, the time of day, specific, usually very time specific type messaging, particularly, for example, retail, around flash sales, big tentpole sales events. And rather than just have, for example, here we are, November 25th. I'm not sure when the episode will go out, but it's Thanksgiving week. Rather than having the same Black Friday sale message for a 2-week or 10-day period, we're able to update that so that there's, you know, certain products or product assortments are highlighted on particular days, or a countdown, for example, to particular doorbusters, et cetera. So much kind of like social media, it enabled audio to be very, very real time, which from a digital audio perspective wasn't really how that channel was activated to that point. And so Studio.AI was a real leg up in us helping to demonstrate clients not only the capability that this type of real time creative messaging can be deployed in digital audio, but it can be done simply. It can be done without having to get one's head around a whole entire new system or set of processes, but rather it could just be a kind of a bolt-on extension of what's kind of already being run in, as I said, in these other digital channels.
Yeah, and that's a very big shift, because I think that when marketers think about audio, it also feels a little overwhelming. Like there are so many different channels, and it doesn't feel like you can reach your specific target audience with a highly personalized message when all the podcasts are run under different organizations. You're not sure like how stable or how valid a network that reaches into them actually is. So I know marketers are always thinking about performance, and we know that the more personalized, the more timely, more relevant, the higher the performance. Who were some of the clients that have been through the Studio.AI experience, and what were the results that they were seeing by being able to onboard audio into their overall marketing campaign?
Sure. So I'd say a couple of good examples for, you know, retail is a very strong category for us, as telco and travel. So the Walmarts of the world, Target, Verizon in telco, and then, you know, the large travel operators, Expedia Group, et cetera, you know, being able to, for example, prompt spontaneous travel. So it's a Wednesday or Tuesday, maybe going into a holiday weekend. it's a very opportune moment to pitch someone on, or that listener, on a 3-day long weekend getaway, right? But there's no point in pitching me sitting in New York a quick weekend jaunt to California, because that's obviously not that convenient or close. But maybe Florida would be an option, or a city break to Boston. You get the idea. So versioning that, for yourself in Ohio, forgive my ignorance, but I don't know off the top of my head a perfect weekend getaway that's a short 90-minute drive from where you are, but maybe you'll educate me. But being able to run a scaled national audio campaign where every listener around the country is hearing about, oh, that actually is very doable for me and quite appealing, one can naturally understand why that would be perhaps more effective and penetrating than just a more generic kind of static ad that isn't able to be as specific in terms of referencing and conveying the experience that in this example Expedia are trying to get the listener to imagine.
I love that. And just for a little bit about Ohio, it depends on what age you are. So that would be another important data point. When I was younger, 90 minutes away is the islands in Lake Erie. And really, that's just a party. No matter how family friendly they try to make it, Kelly's Island, Put-in-Bay, where you go if you are going to dance your face off and drink. And then now, as you get older, you go to Michigan. Like, where can I go and enjoy the lake without a party? But I love the hyper personalization that drives a ton of results. As we look ahead into 2025, you recently posted on LinkedIn that podcast is now $1 billion business driven by dynamic ad insertion. And I was surprised. I was like, holy crap. I mean, I know there's a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. But what are some other things as we look ahead into 2025 and the opportunities? What do you think marketers should know as they start to plan their budgets and how they're going to reach their audiences?
Yeah, so I said the word, I think I've said the word silo before. So it's interesting because to this point, podcasting as a kind of channel within a channel, it's audio, but it's been treated quite separately to digital or streaming audio at large. I think looking ahead, other silos are going to start to consolidate, such that with the increase, for example, of audience buying and particularly programmatic in digital audio, being able to aggregate specific audiences across these different audio formats, not just podcasting, but I would imagine quite soon audiobooks, which, in my view, I have no horse in this race, so to speak, but I think that if any scaled media enterprise will ultimately be ad supported in some way, shape, or fashion, which I personally think is a solid bet, then I'm very, very bullish on audiobooks being kind of like a very, very material, substantive ad business over the next few years. I don't think it will happen necessarily in 2025 because I think it's difficult to launch an ad-supported product or offering in that space because of the rights involved and, let's say current air of cautiousness. But as the demand signal from consumers continues to kind of prove strong and increasingly unignorable, I think that, much like what we've seen in streaming video, audiobooks will become kind of like a really prominent part of the overall audio mix. That would include streaming audio, it would include podcasts, and in short order, I think it will also include broadcast radio. So now that audio has become more agile, more addressable, closer to what clients and advertisers are used to with the more established kind of digital channels that we touched on earlier, I think that we can expect to see more of the buying practices, specifically programmatic audience led media buying, occur across audio as a holistic channel. And I'd like to think that AMA could play a role in helping X advertiser version the creative appropriately so that it is mindful of the environment, such that if it's an audio book, you might want to show up in a slightly different way than streaming audio, for example. So that's from our perspective, very interesting to see those different formats mature, and then from an advertising perspective, almost kind of aggregate into kind of one large audio channel mix.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And you're right. I think the consumer demand or consumer movement toward digital audio isn't going to reverse or stop. Like personally, I can't remember the last time I listened to the radio. I am almost exclusively on podcasts and music on Spotify. And it's even how I discover new music or new podcasts, just the technology that's built into the audio platforms and their power of suggestion and recommendation. Uh, so if I'm thinking about my media mix, where do I get started? Like what kinds of assets are serve as like the core assets that you version off of? And what do I need to know, if anything, about my audience and the amount of audio or digital audio they're consuming before I approach something like an AMA in order to get the most out of it?
So, I mean, clearly the combination of media agency and the publishers, provide tremendously valuable information with respect to audiences, consumption patterns, etc. So, that's very typically the starting point. As I often say, if your ad effectively, if your creative is say 15% or more on your car insurance, or let's say 16% or more on your car insurance, it might well be that media strategy and creative strategy is we have one very clear asset and we have got a very broad target. In which case that's going to be a very, very different media plan than, let's say, what podcasting, or one of the things that podcasting has really done as a channel, which is to provide a very, very engaged, targeted audience around a specific lifestyle or passion. I mean, there's many examples. We know the AG1, in the kind of health space, of course, is a useful case study. But there's many others. So I mean, that's kind of like one almost one side of the pendulum or spectrum to the other. So I think that is a useful starting place, and from there you're able to understand, well, what are the adjacent segments that may not be, for example, consuming fitness and health motivational podcasting content. We've got those. I think as AG1 has grown, and you'll see this with lots of other companies and new entrants in categories, then there's less core users also become very valuable marginal new customers, new clients, new customers, I should say. And so the media strategy then has to adjust. So now we've got a whole and very valuable addressable segment of consumers that don't self-identify as a health nut, but still care about and appreciate the ease and simplicity of having a scoop of green powder once a day as kind of like a great insurance against, future malady down the line. But again, a very different mindset to an individual who's looking to kind of be the absolute top best form, physical and mental shape that they can possibly be in, right? It's just sorry for going on about a very, very specific example, but it's kind of interesting that we see more and more cases of this where you think the product is one thing, you think the brand is one thing, and it is a very clear proposition, but how it exists in the mind of the consumer is actually quite different when you look closely at these different segments. And so being able to tailor your message and your approach to those different kind of motivations is, in our view, really, really valuable, particularly in helping to grow brands and business from the initial core heavy user of a product.
Yeah, I think that message has been very consistent across our last few episodes and is so important to get back to really thinking about the motivation, the mindset, and the context of the audience you're targeting. And we lost our way a little bit like earlier this year, midway through the year. I think everybody was very tech focused. Like, what can I use to do things faster, better, cheaper?
Mhm.
And Studio.AI AMA offers that, but what you're advising, and I think is so important, is to get the most out of these opportunities we have with tech is the time you're saving using AI, the time now they don't have to spend worrying about that versioning or personalization. They should spend thinking about the audience and really crafting, what it is they're creating, what that message is for those different types of audiences, and using AI to get more on behavior data and less on, people who self-identify. Because we all know, even ourselves, sometimes what we self-identify as is not who we are. And it's the little things that we do that really show what drives our purchase decisions. So I love that. I think it's so important heading into 2025 for marketers. If you're saving time on AI, reinvest in understanding the very specific needs of your customers. And that ag example resonated with me. I see that everywhere. So my behavior must be that I'm trying to prevent a future calamity. I'm really into lion's
Yeah,
mane at the time because I've seen a bazillion ads. I'm like, man, this lion's mane. It's gonna
yeah.
kill.
Well,
Um,
it's funny. Mark Pritchard said it, I think, a couple of years ago, quite famously, which was that the targeting as a kind of goal had led them to narrow their intended audiences to a counterproductive level, in the sense that they were they were investing their advertising efforts towards people who were, let's say, likely to already purchase the brand, and had kind of ignored, to their detriment, those adjacent kind of segments, that were still very, very valuable and worthy of investment, but perhaps, just like we're saying, had slightly different motivation or a less innate needs for the particular product, but were certainly persuadable. But if your targeting machine is so precise, it can lead you, as I said, to be blind to those very important audiences that contribute, ultimately are the ones that can contribute growth.
right. Create demand. Absolutely. Uh, so Paul, this has been a very interesting conversation. Lots to think about. Anything else you want to add before we end our episode about, the opportunities in audio, where the industry is going, or what marketers should do to prepare for 2025?
Um, for 2025, I do think that, as there's a couple of trends I think that we can rely on or bank on, which is one of which being is the fragmentation of audiences, which continues to disperse across different platforms, different kind of verticals within those platforms. And so having a sophisticated ML or AI powered both media and creative optimization machine, I don't think is something to aim for, but rather increasingly something that's just necessary for brands, as I say, that count more than one very, very tightly defined target as their addressable market, which, for the vast majority of our clients are kind of large national brands that, as we've touched upon, really do count across different segments, to as their addressable market. And so, as I said, taking advantage of the sophistication of the AI and ML tools for both media optimization as well as creative optimization is, I think, something that will become almost the default in 2025. The recent news of MediaOcean, and their acquisition with Flash Talking, and Innovid, I think, kind of points to that truth. It's a big bet on, as I said, cross-channel media and creative optimization at scale.
I couldn't agree more. So if you are listening to this episode and you want to make sure that AI ML automation is a part of your plan, because that's where you're going to pick up those behaviors to make the most of those adjacent audiences and create demand in a way that's personalized and highly relevant. If we're your agency, contact us. But if not, ask your agency. And definitely make audio a part of your media mix in 2025. It is only going to grow. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and I hope that we get to connect again sometime next year.
I certainly do as well. Thank you, Tessa. Great fun talking to you.
If you want to hear more episodes of Leader Generation, you can find them at modop.com. That's MODOP.com. You can find Paul Kelly and AMA on LinkedIn or on their website, A Million Ads. And until next time, find us on anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and we will talk again soon.